All right, well, it's 10:15, so we'll go ahead and get started since we have about 45 minutes. And I know Aaron he's doing a presentation in the next breakout session, so um, we'll make sure to get this done before he has to go. So my name is Drew Bagby. I'm a librarian here at Front Range Community College, Larimer campus. And today we're going to have a panel discussion about OER. We call it tips and tricks, but it's really just hearing from folks that have a pretty vast experience with different ways of presenting OER and providing it to their students. So I'm going to have each of our presenters. We got Aaron, Bruce, and Nowell right now, and then hopefully we'll hear from Nicholas eventually, but maybe he got busy or something. And then they'll just have them introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with them telling us about their OER projects or their various ways they're involved with OER. So we'll start with Aaron. Aaron, you want to go ahead and tell us about yourself and about your OER experience?
Yeah, so I recently started as full-time faculty at FRCC BCC, and I was affiliate faculty, adjunct faculty before that, and I've been involved with OER since I've been interested in OER since I very first started doing anything here, and I've been involved with it in the past 3 years or so, and I haven't done so. I'm sort of in a position where I haven't done any enormous single project, but I've had my fingers in a lot of different projects. Big thing we're trying to do at the BCC campus is to transition a lot of our math classes over to open resources. It was one of those things where we sort of, we respected what Pearson had available or, whatever the large publishers had available, but the price to the students was so large. And oftentimes it was a situation where materials were like slightly not right, like there was some little thing like, oh, I want to approach this topic in this way and the textbook does it in this way, and rather than being in a situation where you kind of tell students, oh, you have to buy this book and then we're never going to use it, instead it made more sense for us to either make our own materials or adapt other materials. So I've worked on adapting materials for survey of calculus, pre-calculus, Calc 1, Calc 2, and our 266 differential equations and linear algebra class at this point. So I've kind of been all over the place.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Let's hear from Bruce. Bruce, tell us about yourself and your OER experience.
Sure. So my name is Bruce Nye. I'm history faculty at the Westminster campus, and I've been here, 11 going on 12 years and 22 years teaching. And I built last year a online modern China class, history of modern China. So from 1644 to the present day. And I guess we'll probably talk about this more, but one of the reasons I ended up doing OER for it is the bias that was in so many of the textbooks that were available for that topic. Modern China is right now quite a hot topic, and there is a lot of bias out there. So I wanted to try to both use that to my advantage, but also try to be able to steer students away from that in their first experience for most of them with the history of modern China. So I basically built both a textbook, an OER textbook that I built online for the students, and then we used a whole bunch of different other online sources with each module and unit throughout the course to kind of teach the history of modern China. And I'm actually reworking my medieval class that I teach online too this semester to do the same thing. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. And then Nowell, let's hear about your experience with OER and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Nowell Vincent, full-time faculty for interior architecture and design at Larimer campus. And I've worked on a couple of projects. I put together Intro to Interiors, which has been a wonderful class for people that are just interested in the subject matter, or if they're trying to get into our program. And then I also facilitated Professional Practice, which is a 2-credit course. And then I also created Kitchen and Bath 1, which was a big undertaking. And I just got approval to do Sustainable Design and Estimating. So all of these courses that I've created are kind of like a template for moving forward. So we have some continuity in our classes, regardless of who's teaching it. And so I'm looking forward to doing a lot more.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nowell. So what I love about these panels is that we have a very diverse subject group here. So obviously we've got math, we've got interior design, which I still think, Nowell, you might be the only interior design OER producer that I have come across. I've definitely looked. And then Bruce with it's very interesting that the study of Chinese and how we view it from Western society is obviously a very big topic these days. So now let's get into what led you all to create OER materials in the first place. And I know we've talked about it before. Cost is obviously a big deal. So whoever wants to speak to that first, take it over.
Well, I can jump in. That's fine. So for me, as I kind of alluded to a minute ago, the biggest problem was just lack of appropriate textbooks for a modern China course. As I looked at what was available, it was obvious there was a lot of bias there. It kind of reminds me of the old stuff that used to be out there back in the Cold War, whenever, you'd look at Soviet history or anything Eastern European, and there was such a us versus them, good versus bad mentality to it. And really in a lot of the sources, that's, textbook material wise, that's what there is out there for modern China. And because most of the students, in fact, as it turned out, all of the students I had in the class last fall, this is their first modern China class or first Chinese history class they'd ever had. That was really important that we don't introduce them to China with that bias intact. And try to do everything we could to kind of introduce them to China in a way that let them make some of their own decisions. And I also tried to come at it from a non-Western point of view. And most of the things in English are going to be also Western with a Western bias too, right? So, and from the Western point of view. So that was kind of my motivator to why I thought it would be good, since I'm building this new modern China class that we've never taught before. Actually, in the state, we've never taught it, but certainly not at Front Range, that it would be good to kind of get this brand new kind of all hands on deck, clear the board of everything, start new, and see what we could do. And it would be a great opportunity to also experiment with some of this OER stuff that we could use. And so it turned out fantastic. And I think it accomplished what we were trying to do as far as letting students kind of come at this with a clean slate, if you will, and paint their own picture and their own understanding of modern China. So that was my biggest thing, was to try to avoid the bias and that was out there and give them some other options in a kind of a non-Western point of view.
Bruce, every time you talk about this class, I want to take this class. Honestly, it sounds so awesome. Like it's, my family is from Taiwan. So
perfect.
It's a subject of that history. I have a very specific point of view on that history that I've learned from my family. So that sounds like a fantastic thing. And I love the fact that the way you're approaching it and the way the OER has allowed you to do that is, it just sounds really, really awesome.
Yeah. So. Next fall, Aaron, I'll sign you up.
I'll think about it, man. Okay. So for me, like the cost is a really big deal, but also one of the things that always drove me absolutely batty was that I would get students taking my classes and they would, they wouldn't buy an actual physical textbook. They would buy the online access because instead of paying $240, it was $120. And I would like say, okay, well, you can check your notes, you can check the textbook. They have good examples here to look at, and it's good to learn how to read in mathematics, to read and learn by reading, and we can walk through these examples. And they would try to access the textbook through my math labs or whatever, and it always felt like the online access for the textbook was meant more to prevent people from stealing the textbook than it was for students to be able to access it effectively. It's this incredibly slow, unresponsive. It's not like a PDF reader. It doesn't have good table of contents, good navigation. It's just designed to be like, we're going to make this as difficult as possible for you to pirate reasonably. And that frustrated me. Like, if I'm asking students to be buying this textbook, they should have access to the textbook. They should be able to use it as an actual resource. And, there's so many reasons why moving to OER was a good idea: cost, freedom in ability to edit materials. But a big one that doesn't necessarily always come to mind is that it gives students better accessibility. I can make my text or my materials, and I can just give them a PDF that has a nicely built table of contents that pops up in Adobe, or D2L's new PDF reader now pulls a table of contents into the little into the sidebar. They can use that for navigation, and I can make something that's friendly and useful and open and something they can access and something they can hold on to for the rest of their life. They don't feel like they have to sell it back to recoup some of that investment, So maybe not the rest of their life, but at least the rest of the time they're taking math classes. So.
Noel, any thoughts on what brought you to want to create your OER?
I will share. Okay.
Right on.
I feel like when I was a student, I had invested probably, $1,000 in materials a semester. It was expensive. And then they sat on a shelf. So I always try to take the perspective of a student, first. And if it's content that changes so much every year and our industry changes so big time, that makes the most sense to do something that's very modern. So as a content expert, and it's great that we're all content experts in our field, that I didn't have anything less than an author to give my students. And so I really wanted to share my perspective. And I think it's really important also to get a variety of perspectives instead of just studying one author's perspective. And my internet is a little bit unstable, so I might be pausing here. It's also multifaceted. So instead of just reading a book and a chapter, we're going to have students learn software through the process as well. So we have like a software called Bluebeam, where in estimating, you would just take a piece of paper and an architectural scale and actually do quantify. Well, in Bluebeam, it's much faster, and you can actually teach the software while you're learning the subject matter. So it's really a diverse way of looking at learning. And they come out of the classes with value added. So also there's so much to say for active learning. I do exercises all the time in the classroom. There's nothing really formal about it. I just have, here's the subject matter. You're all going to consolidate onto a PowerPoint, and you're going to present, what is an undermount sink? What is, a dual fuel toilet, and all those components that would naturally be a picture and some narrative is already online. So that was another big one. We learn a lot on site. We do a lot of field trips. And so our students are much more engaged when it comes from another point of view. It's not just me telling them that this is the case. So we do a lot of field work, which definitely allows them to engage a little bit more, especially with their community. And everyone does it in different ways. So why not just, look at it as if we're all practicing and sharing. And I think that that's kind of the way of the world should be with education, instead of having such a heavy hit every semester when you're purchasing your materials.
Excellent. Thanks, Noel. So again, obviously we've got a really experienced panel here. And the next question, I think oftentimes is the question I get are like, why is this so challenging? Why is this so hard? So some of the, I know Noel definitely has some experience with some challenges. So that's my question: is what are the challenges that you've faced or have overcome in creating your OER materials? And I'll start with Nowell because I'm familiar with hers. So go ahead, Nowell.
You bet. Thank you. So the biggest one was, as a professional designer, you hire a professional photographer to take pictures of your work. And I've been doing this for 20 years. So I have a pretty big portfolio. And then I realized that I couldn't use my photographer's photographs because they're his. And so luckily I had some that were, me taking pictures of him and taking pictures, which is fine, so I had to get permission to use those. But so my angle, a way around it, was basically to use software to render all of the projects that I've worked on over the past 20 years. And it's almost reality. So it's exactly what was built. So that was helpful. And then also using your own camera, using your own phone to go snip pictures was an obstacle that I got over quickly. It's like, how do I get from point A to point B? And then you're always trying to figure out the hardest way to do it. And then you're like, I can just go take a picture, So there's definitely obstacles with that. Also organizing it in a way that is a good template. So if you're going to do multiple OERs, I think that that's a good way to kind of attack it, is, find a good method to your madness and stick to it.
Thanks, Nowell. Aaron, any challenges that you want to speak to?
So, I mean, there have been a lot of little challenges here and there. I build almost all of my materials, anything that's like textual. I build it in a language called LaTeX, which is a typesetting language that's used in the STEM field a lot. Most papers in physics, mathematics, IT, comp sci, that sort of stuff are typesetted in LaTeX. And it's a super flexible language. And I've learned a lot and had a bunch of challenges going through and writing stuff. But honestly, looking at this question, for me, the biggest challenges were just starting. And it made me realize that it's not as hard as I thought it would be. Like, a lot of this stuff starts to feel like, it's all that knowledge that you've built up as an expert in your field, which is why you're teaching in your field. And getting that down and providing it to students in a real concrete way is easier than you think it is, I think. And I kind of want to be sort of cynical and say, or not cynical. Cynical is the opposite word. I want to say, there aren't that many challenges. You can do it. It's just start making the materials. And if you do a little bit every single semester, before you know it, you're going to have an entire course.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Just get going and get the ball rolling. And OER becomes much easier after that. I mean, it does take time, but yeah, in the keynote earlier they mentioned just start somewhere. Just don't worry about the overwhelming feeling that OER can create to people that are starting out, not knowing what they're doing exactly, but just get going somehow. And that's great.
I realized that I was writing lecture notes. When I was giving lectures, I was writing lecture notes before the lectures. I was handwriting them on a piece of paper that I would throw away or file away somewhere I'd never see again. I just started typing those instead. And I wrote 200 pages last semester.
Wow.
Very
cool. And Bruce, I know you've talked about some of the challenges as from the standpoint of the materials aren't, they're viewed from the Western perspective, and you're talking about a place that is obviously not Western taught. So any other challenges that you've had?
Well, we one of the things you just kind of hinted at, time. No matter how much time you budget to do this, it will not be enough. I'll just tell you that right now. It is amazing how much time this eats up, but it's well worth it. I mean, I wouldn't let that hold you back at all. But that was my big surprise, was just how much time it takes to do this, to do it right is really the big thing. And then the other thing to remember is, especially here at Front Range, you're not, none of us are experts in all of these different things that you need to do OER. So for example, when it comes time to put this into your course, I'm one of the leads in online learning, and you know, our online learning people, we're ranked number 6 in the country for a reason. We have just awesome online people that can help you make sense of all this and put it into your courses in a way that it pops and it's exciting. And I mean, I think I learned just as much about building D2L shells in all the different ways that you can do it and all the different things that you can marry into D2L to make it exciting and invigorating with your OER than just, you know, throwing in a PDF. And so that's really cool. But you don't need to learn that because there's already people that have that stuff, the instructional design, you know, people that we have. And again, I work with the online one in particular, but I know we've got them on each campus. But, you know, take the time to go talk to those folks, get them involved in your project, because it will save you so much time and so many headaches. And they're excited to do this stuff too. You know, OER has really changed a lot in the last couple of years, and it's the new and exciting thing. And it's something that really is only limited by your imagination as to how you want to use it and what you want to do. But, you know, there are certainly challenges, like Nowell mentioned, there's the copyright challenges and all those kinds of things that can become an issue, sourcing and how you do all that. I'm kind of, you know, in one way, history has been in a lot of the front edge of this over the last few years, mostly for K through 12 courses and homeschooling and that kinds of thing. It never was the day that I thought as a college professor I'd be modeling anything on homeschooling, but you know, they've been doing a lot of things, and you have to look at the pioneers of this, right? And how a lot of it works and what works for them. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. That's again, yeah, the time commitment to me as a librarian, that's the thing that stands out the most. Time commitment it's definitely a real thing, but like Bruce is saying, I believe OER is well worth it. And that kind of leads me into my next question, because I personally feel that OER and the onset of this concept really does benefit students in the long run. So how have your students responded to your OER materials? That's my next question. And whoever wants to start, go for it. So
the biggest pushback I've had, and it's not even really that much. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to go ahead? No, I can. Okay. So the biggest pushback I've had actually is the one thing that the big publishers have over the OER stuff is homework platforms, online homework platforms. There are low-cost open source online homework platforms for math. Edfinity and Lumen are both fantastic options. We actually have a WebWorks server, which is an online homework platform that is front range, like it's a front range WebWorks server. It's completely free to use, completely free to students. Please ask me if you're interested in any way. It's awesome. I think it's actually a CCCS server, but they're not quite at the point where Pearson software is. Pearson has had more money to develop. They've spent more time with it. And that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. And it's something that students have been frustrated with, because there's the biggest thing that like the Pearson platform has is that they have a lot of support built into their online homework platform. So when a student has a question or they get stuck on a problem, there's always a, give me a hint, help me solve this, show me an example type of stuff. And that's all built in. And there's half of me that thinks like, okay, it's really awesome that that stuff is there because it really helps them kind of self-seek assistance and figure out how to solve these types of problems. But I also kind of find it frustrating because oftentimes it's just help me solve this, and then I just follow the exact steps that are written out rather than learning anything about the problem. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but it's definitely something that students have pushed back on. They found the online homework platforms are more difficult to use and have been more frustrating for students in general. So.
And Nowell, what have your students said about your?
I don't know if my students remembered that. Sorry, did you say something? Okay. I don't remember my students recognizing that it was an OER class. I think I mentioned it, in the beginning, and they're like, what's that? And I explained it, and then we just moved forward. And I realized that we finished a week early. So I realized that my ability to import this curriculum made me so much more effective at teaching. And I stayed on target, which is unheard of. And so the last week, they were stressed out about the other classes that they were taking. So I'm not sure how they reacted. I did get feedback from a different class that I built for my intro class that I did not teach. And I'm now revising some things to help organize that in a more formal way for new students.
Very cool. Very cool. And Bruce?
Yeah, well, Noel, I'm going to have to talk to you about how you got through a class a week early, because that's one of my great fears as a historian, as we get to the end, and I'm always worried because they missed the last 50 years of whatever class I'm teaching. So I think most of my students still don't know the Cold War is over. Anyway, but, for me, I think the only thing that sticks in my mind as far as an issue goes, I had one student that registered for the China class that ended up dropping after the first week when she found out there wasn't a textbook, because she just couldn't bend her head around the idea that she didn't have a textbook in front of her to look at, which I get. I'm a book person myself, and I like the books, but everybody else in there, I did a little survey, and I did midterm and their final were orals, where they would meet with me on Zoom and we would chat. And the midterm, half of the test, if you will, was, hey, what's working in the class? What's not working? Let's fix it and kind of talk about it, since it was a brand new course. And almost every single one of them, the one thing that they all said, oh, this is great, is the OER stuff. They really liked it once they got by kind of that fear of not having a hard, a tangible textbook in front of them. And I think they learned quickly that they could transfer it, they can download it and put it on their pad or their phone, or, wherever else they wanted it, and they could export it into different programs and use it there for note taking or whatever. So I think it really helped a lot of them too that way. But that's the only example I can think of that really sticks out from my particular experience with the class, where a student she didn't really give it a chance either, but I get that. I understand why she was concerned, and, respect to that. But that was really the only thing. It's just, she just was a little blown away that there wasn't a textbook in the traditional sense.
Yeah, I could see that being, and I think the last time we did this panel, you mentioned that the older crowd, like older students, might be a little bit more skeptical of OER.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously that is, times are changing, and as we progress with OER, that will hopefully change. But it is a consideration to think about, since we are community college, instructors and librarians and all of that. We do have older crowds sometimes that technology or accessing particular things might be a little more difficult, but I think of all of the issues, that's a very small one. So
yeah. And when you consider, I think it was Aaron that mentioned the cost is usually significantly less, or in my case, non-existent. That goes a long way to helping students be willing to try OER, right?
Yes.
When they don't have to shell out cash for books.
There's that stereotype of, oh, my professor wrote his own textbook and now he's selling it to us. What a scam. But when you give it to them for free, they're not as upset about that, I found.
Yeah.
Yeah, selling your book to the kids, that's to the students, that's a funny way to make money, that's for sure. All right, so the last question I have, and then after this we'll open it up to the folks that might have their own questions. It's really just, what advice would you give other FRCC instructors or folks that are thinking about dipping their toes in the water of OER? What advice would you give them? And I know this probably goes back a little bit to the challenges that we were talking about, but if you have any wisdom to impart to our participants here, that would be great. So Aaron, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, the obvious one is what I said when I was talking about challenges. Just start. But another big one is find someone to work with, find someone to bounce ideas off of, find someone to read what you're writing. And like Noelle was saying, when she, you got a lot of really, really valuable feedback from someone else running your course, right? And having someone else get eyes on those materials is such an important part of that, because like with the materials I've made for my own classes, it's so natural for me. I know exactly how to use all of them, but one of the best parts about OER is having people be able to adapt your materials. So, work together, reach out to people, talk with people, ask for feedback, work as a team. And I think that's a really, really helpful way to make sure that your materials are effective and useful.
All right, Bruce, any advice that you would like to impart here?
Sure. If I could go back and do it again, I wouldn't have started with a brand new course doing everything OER, because I just didn't have the experience. And like I said, it took a lot longer than I did. So even if you're thinking about doing it, start small, do 1 unit of a course, see how it works, see what works, what doesn't work. How things for your particular class, not everything translates well to OER. And some things really do. So, I would have started out smaller if I'd really been thinking about it, but I was just excited and just jumped in. But that's probably my biggest thing is maybe, if you're thinking about doing it, try it small first and kind of get a feel for it and then expand, and see what works for you. And just then the other thing is kind of like Aaron was just saying, collaborate, talk to people, things like this where people that have done it, reach out to them, and see what works for them. You don't have to reinvent the wheel time and time and time again. And there are certain things like I think that I've learned about my class with OER that I think it doesn't matter what discipline you're doing, they would be pertinent to all of those different things. So that, I think that would be my other thing.
Cool. And then Noelle, any advice? And then we'll have a question actually for Noelle in the chat, so we can get to that afterwards.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of templates. And so if you can find a way to kind of strategize on how you're going to organize, and I work backwards. So if I'm like, okay, what do they need to learn? What is the most important thing about this half of the semester? And then I just work backwards. The question was, how do you create a digital workbook? There's a lot of platforms that you can use. PowerPoint's just one of them, and turning it into a PDF, where you can actually make it a live PDF. You can use a platform called Issuu, which is ISSUU, to make like a digital magazine. And so those are some really easy ones to do for free. And then I also am a big fan of structured learning materials that you can use active learning with. So if I have a lesson for sustainability for maybe, a week, then I'll have, specific slides that have the content, major points, and then I'll have the students learn and research and do all that. So it's kind of them creating the work, so it's not as difficult as long as you can think through the structure of what it is that their end product looks like. It's empowering for the students.
And could you give us the name of that platform that you just mentioned again?
Yes, Issuu, I think it's called.
Oh, cool. Thank you. All right. Any other questions from our participants today for our panel? Again, you have a really great panel here of people with obviously a lot of experience, and they're obviously still working through OER and understanding it. So any more questions? And again, I will mention that there are grants. I'm sure you're aware that there are grants available through FRCC for OER production and use in your class. And here at Larimer campus, I know Gene Runyon, the VP, is a very big proponent of OER. So if you ever have questions, you can email Jean or Tanae. I think Tanae would probably be able to answer that as well, those questions as well, if you're trying to get a grant, and definitely utilize those resources. I think the last time we did this panel, Bruce talked about how he was able to get a grant even after the period of, receiving the grant had ended because we had money left over. So definitely don't let it go to waste.
I
I actually,
Mhm.
oh, go ahead. I actually have a question about, do you know if the plan is to do another round of grants again next year?
I don't right now, but I would be surprised if we weren't, because like I said, I know that Jean is very on board with OER and getting folks into the OER rhythm here. So I can ask Molly if she has heard anything about that, but my guess is that we are still going to offer it, but I can't say it's a guarantee. So. So yeah, if people are done and don't have any more questions, then we can go ahead.
I think
and
Kat has her
Oh.
Kat has her hand up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
go ahead.
Aaron. Yeah, my web camera seems to be
Oh.
dying, so my video's done. So I have an education class that I teach for adult educators, and OER has been a goal of mine for a long time, because adult educators might be lucky to be working 20 hours a week, probably with no health care or other benefits. And the classes they're required to take, there are 4 of them, can cost anywhere from $700 to $1,500. So I don't want to tax hardworking adult educators with a textbook. I love my textbook. It's great. But if it were an industry where the pay was better, I'd stay with it. So my question, mostly Bruce and Aaron, but Nowell, if you've got an answer for this as well. My assumption, if you have created your own textbook, I'm guessing that you did a lot of the writing yourself, but that maybe you also pulled in outside resources. I'm just wondering kind of what percentage your current material is of stuff that you had to create and stuff that you were able to find free online or elsewhere.
So one thing that I will admit to being a huge advantage in being in mathematics is that we have a more interesting view on what plagiarism is than a lot of other fields. Just because if you use a really strong definition of what plagiarism is, you can't use the quadratic formula anymore without citing it every time. So I know that I ended up writing a ton of my own materials, but I'm fortunate enough to be in a discipline where there's a ton of open materials out there. And so I could pull in, like, if I didn't want to make a diagram or something like that, I could pull in something on an open license from some other source. I think the first place to start with stuff like that is honestly to see if there's anything out there in your discipline that is open. There's some really great resources out there for open textbooks. OpenStax is one of them. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's like a librarian would be able to answer this question better than I would. But there's a ton of resources out there to find text that you could potentially adapt to. So,
I wanted to say, if you don't mind me popping in briefly, I worked on the Math 120 college-wide textbook, and we actually started with a open textbook from Lumen, and we basically did a minor edit of one of the 4 sections, major edits of the other 2, and 2 more, and then threw out 1 section and wrote the 4th completely on our own. But that's basically how we ran it. Was we started with an open textbook that someone else had created that we were able to use, and basically did a lot of editing with some new writing.
I did the same thing for my Math 125 project. So definitely, if you know that you don't necessarily have the ability or the time in particular to write all of your own materials, that's the beautiful thing about OER, is that the licenses are such that you can adapt other OER. So
Yeah. And Kat, I would be shocked if there aren't already things out there with what you're looking to do
There's some. I've been on Merlot and OpenStax and OER Commons. There's some. A
Yeah,
lot of it's at the graduate level, and these are 100 level classes.
sure.
So yeah, there's a lot of picking and sifting through, and I think that's got to be a huge amount of the time. It's just vetting the stuff that you're looking at.
That's, for my project, a lot of the open source material that's out there is designed for people that have more of a background of Chinese history rather than beginning. So like graduate level, that kind of a thing, or at least upper division. So a lot of mine was rewriting, or at least explaining, like for every couple of paragraphs, I might find somewhere else that works, that I could cite. I then might have to do a couple of paragraphs to kind of fill in holes so they have an understanding of what we're even talking about. So yeah, that's part of it. That's part of the time consuming part of it is the writing.
I also feel mine is a little bit different than everybody else's just because it's not a lot of verbiage. It's more illustrative. And so I have a ton of projects that I've worked on. So I, have loads of floor plans and construction documents, and YouTube is a great resource as well, as long as you're citing the work and making sure that you're giving credit and you can take your students to their websites. And you can have that link in your PowerPoint as long as you cite that. I believe that's totally fine. And so, that's a great source for modern, what's new in technology, what's out there for, quick tools that you can use if you're learning how to quantify. There's, calculator soup, so if my students learn how to quantify carpet, they can actually check their work, and I'll tell them about calculator soup afterwards. So it's all the tools are really out there. It's just how you structure it.
Excellent. Thank you all again so much for coming to this panel this morning. And we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up because like I said, I know Aaron has to get to another discussion. He's going to be presenting in our next breakout session. So if you all want to check out Aaron's presentation, is it you and Ken Monks?
Yeah, Ken will be joining us a couple minutes in. We're going to talk about what we've been doing for the Calc 2 class here at BCC, which is fully open, fully free to students. So. Excellent.
Well, again, thanks all for coming. Great questions from our participants today too. So we really appreciate that. The last time we did this panel, I think we might have had one participant. And so I was asking all the questions and trying to come up with things off the top of my head. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, we have another round of breakout sessions starting at 11:15. So check that out. And if anybody has any questions they want to ask, please feel free to email me, drew.bagby@frontrange.edu. I will circle back one last time to Nowell's statement about copyright. If you do have questions about copyright, feel free to email any of the librarians in the system. We're not copyright experts, but we will collaborate and try to come up with a good answer to help you if you're having any copyright issues. Because I do remember Nowell's picture situation. Like at one point, we even had a form for somebody to sign, and it was like kind of like a crazy scenario. So anyway, thanks again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck with your OER.